You're listening to Curiosity Invited with David Bryan here on LA Talk Radio.
Hello, my name is David Bryan, and this is Curiosity Invited, a podcast inspired by endless curiosity. Tune in for an open-minded conversation about interesting and important things. Hello, and welcome to Curiosity Invited. My name is David Bryan, and today I have the great pleasure of speaking with two individuals. Dr. Peter Schnall, an MD by training, also has a master's in public health. He is the founder of the Center for Social Epidemiology and its director and a primary researcher. And the other is Dr. Marnie Dobson, who is a sociologist by training, and she is the center's associate director. In particular, we'll be speaking about the center's Healthy Work campaign. You'll hear more about that in a minute. Marnie is the director of that campaign, and Dr. Schnall, Peter, is the associate director. Marnie has been studying social epidemiology for over 17 years. Peter has been studying social epidemiology, its relationship with well-being and health and poor health for 40 plus years. It's an interesting conversation, and I hope you stick around for it. Do me a favor, and one of you, give us a quick and dirty, what is epidemiology, what is social epidemiology, and say something about the Center for Social Epidemiology before we go on to the Healthy Work campaign itself.
Well, I'll let Marnie talk about the social part of social epidemiology.
Fair enough.
And I will talk about the epidemiology part of it, which is basically a science, a set of hypotheses, insights, and technology that allows researchers to take groups of people and measure qualities of the person and then connect them to various outcomes that are of interest. So epidemiologists are professional people who conduct research on populations in which exposures, qualities of the person, or in aspects of the environment are studied and looked at in relationship to various outcomes. So in our work, where we look at psychosocial stressors, we measure qualities of work, say demands or work hours, or even qualities of the individual, their gender or race or social class. And then we attempt to relate those to specific outcomes.
And when you say specific outcomes, it's related to well-being, yes? Health and well-being? Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
We try and predict why people are doing well or why they're not doing well.
Right. And what about that social part?
Epidemiology, obviously, as Peter said, is the scientific study of epidemics. We have a lot of chronic disease epidemics in our society now, and heart disease is, of course, the number one leading cause of death in the United States. But the social epidemiologists, really want to understand the social causes of these epidemics. So, what do we mean by social causes? It could be aspects of an individual. So, as Peter mentioned, gender plays a role in whether or not people develop heart disease. We know women, for example, tend not to develop heart disease till after menopause. Social class is a major, what we call social determinant that's looked at in social epidemiology, because we know that people who are poorer, people who have less income, and people who have less education are much more likely to die from heart disease, to develop heart disease, and also to die earlier than people that have more education, more income, and so forth. So that's kind of a rule in social epidemiology.
So that's the sort of large umbrella under which the particular research and the Healthy Work campaign are operating, yeah? And so can you say something about what the Healthy Work campaign is?
The Healthy Work campaign was based on that same mission. In around 2018, 17, 18, Peter and I and our colleagues were sitting around talking about how we have all this great scientific data that shows that unhealthy working conditions, particular kinds of work stressors, sort of sources of stress in the work environment. Peter mentioned some: high job demands, workload, long work hours, social support or lack of social support, work-family conflict, all these elements that have been measured scientifically as forms of stress and have been shown through these epidemiology studies to predict onset of depression, burnout, heart disease, that this information needed to be known more broadly to everyone, because we all sort of take stress for granted. I think we're all like, oh, stress happens. It's just some part of what we do for business.
Yeah, I guess I think it's important to drill down on that word, right? I mean, because it's a word that has that people have a very common understanding of it. Oh, I'm so stressed, right? Like, well, whatever. The baseball game was so stressful, right? Whatever it was. And this is a question. That's not the stress you are talking about, right?
In part, I think stress is a complex of factors. Obviously it's biological, and we can think about the elements of that because we all have it. It's a mechanism that we use as human beings to either fight when we're under threat or to flee, run away from a threat. And we've had it, as part of our survival instincts forever. So that's a stress response that we see. Our heart rate increases. Our palms might get sweaty. We have higher blood pressure when we're under stress. All of these elements that are part of this acute stress response. But what we're interested in is what causes that feeling of threat in the first place. Why do we, as modern human beings that aren't usually, chased by tigers anymore, why do we still experience stress, and in what ways, what environments are we more likely to experience stress?
Mm-hmm.
That's where the social part comes into it, because what we found is that there are certain things that occur in the work environment that are kind of symbolic threats. People who feel like they're not able to get all of the demands of the job done in a certain time period. They feel time pressure, or they have conflicting demands. They have multiple supervisors telling them different things, which increases their demands and provokes the stress response. So what we're looking at are the sources of stress, the things that cause the stress response. And so that's sort of the main difference when we talk about these scientific measurements of stress, is the causes of stress.
Okay.
Let me jump in, David, just to amplify one thing that Marty said, because that was a very nice summary. So one of the really big differences between the life that human beings lived in the past and the way we live today in our modern society is the issue of chronicity of exposure to demands. When you're a hunter-gatherer and you're out chasing down, the dinner for this evening or for the next few days, your interaction in the environment that involves risk taking is usually fairly short and abrupt, okay, and self-limited. You hunt an animal, you kill the animal, or the animal kills you. It's brief. But we've now evolved a society where the manufacture and production of the things we need to live, which includes food and clothing and automobiles and housing, et cetera, these are things that require consistent, persistent, elevated effort. We go to work in the morning and we are confronted with demands, things that we need to accomplish in the course of the workday. And some of these things are stressors. They are things that we recognize cognitively in our own brains that, oh my God, we need to do something about these demands, okay, or we'll be in some sort of trouble. We won't get the job done.
It won't be a tiger, but it will be something.
Yeah.
It
Might lose your job.
it's this, yes, it's the social setting in which we find ourselves.
Right.
And Marnie's right. Your job insecurity, which is one of the things which we label as a workplace stressor, is one of the many things that we could be perceiving about work during the workday. And the thing is, we are aroused by these demands. These demands require us to put in more effort than we would like to be, certainly more effort than sitting and reading a book or watching a television program at home.
I mean, physiologically, we are aroused physiologically by these certain demands.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's correct. Now, how do scientists like us, epidemiologists, or other people who study the physiology of human functioning, how do we know that something's going on here, then other than just, oh, gee, I got to get my work done, so okay, I'll just take care of it? Because we can actually measure things like your blood pressure at work while you're working. We have devices today, ambulatory blood pressure monitors,
Sure,
which we can put on people. We can follow them around during their normal day, and when they're off, when their blood pressures, basically when they're relaxing and taking it easy, their blood pressures are nice and low. But when they go to work, okay, their blood pressures go up. In fact, if you study bus drivers, when the bus driver goes to get in the bus with an ambulatory blood pressure cuff on his arm, which we're able to do these days, their blood pressure goes up the minute they walk up the stairs and get behind the wheel of the bus.
before they even start. Before they even turn the key.
Before they turn the key, they're cognitively getting themselves ready for the challenges, okay, that the job presents. And they know what these challenges are. When I was in Colombia doing some consulting work, they have a training program where they put you behind this series of screens with a whole setup for driving a bus. The chair moves, okay, the screens move, you turn the wheel and you step on the gas pedal and you shift gears. Okay, so my blood pressure went up, okay, before I even started driving the bus. When I killed my first pedestrian, okay, and they said, okay, that's it, you can't drive this bus anymore. Okay. Killing pedestrians is not allowed, even when you're behind the wheel of an automated
make-believe bus. Yeah.
Make-believe bus. Okay. So my point here about chronicity is that it consistently results in arousal. The arousal, though, is not something we're consciously aware of most of the time. Now, that doesn't mean we won't become aware of it if it goes on severely and for long enough. Okay.
Right.
But we go through the workday. We're tired at the end of the workday. Our blood pressure has gone up. Our heart rates have gone up. Okay.
And stayed there. And stayed there for longer than they would be if it was tiger related.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, many of these effects carry over to your non-work environment.
Uh-huh.
Okay. You bring them home. You are angry or upset, and you may not be consciously aware of it. You fight with your wife,
right.
Work, family imbalance. And then we don't sleep well at night.
Right.
It interferes with our sleep.
Right.
It interrupts our sleep. It shortens our sleep schedule. And many of our jobs don't allow us to sleep 8 hours anyhow.
So, okay. So one of the things spinning around and certainly in my mind, and I hope that all of the thousands of people watching this, and theirs as well, people are different. So not everybody responds to anything in exactly the same way as somebody else. Well, some people, but so then it's conceivable that one person in the virtual or real bus, right? I mean, has a different approach, and right, they're stressed, their heart rate's up, their blood pressure's up, they're like, I hate this freaking job, whatever. And another person is another day at the bus, another day at the bus, and they're greeting the people and they feel very differently about it. So why is this not a conversation about, why is this a conversation about work stressors and not worker temperament or
coping skills
or coping skills or appropriate jobs for people with different temperaments? Maybe they're stressed and they don't know it, but maybe so how do you sort through, how do you unpack the temperament question?
Peter, you want to start
Marnie?
with that one?
Go ahead, go for it, Marnie.
Well, Peter has some good evidence, of the role of personality in terms of job strain and blood pressure. But, in general, I think this is an excellent question. And this is part of, sort of the theory and the testing and the science that's been going on for decades is, of course, there's one theory called person environment fit, which is this idea that we need to fit people to their work environments, and that if there's a better fit, there'll be less stress, basically. And of course, this theory is about coping and resilience. You hear that a lot these days.
Sure.
I think, obviously individual variability plays a role, and to the extent to which people experience stress, and also the long-term effect of that stress. There's a lot of different buffers to stress. Obviously, if you have, and this is a classic one in our field, if you have more job control, meaning that you have somewhat of a say over your demands and the pace of those demands, if you have somewhat of a say over how your workplace is run, or some autonomy about deciding how you do your job in general, that is actually a protective factor against stress. So people in certain occupations, probably with a lot higher job control, you could think about the CEO, you could think about some top executives, you could think about, to some extent, teachers who have some control in the classroom, although that's changed over the years. Job control itself, if we can improve everyone's job control, within a certain range of occupations, then we're going to have people that people are going to experience less stress. So that varies by occupation, of course. So we do see much higher stress levels among people in low wage work, where there is, greater job insecurity, where there is lower wages, and there is, there's a room there for folks to really have a difficult financial, strain in life if they lose their jobs.
Yeah.
So that's some elements of it.
Yeah.
In terms of resilience, and this idea that we can train people to have more resilience, we're not against that idea. I think having people that know how to deal with stress symptoms. We hear about mindfulness, we hear about meditation, we hear about stress management. I think these are valuable things that can help people. But again, when you have a job that's highly stressful, like bus driving or working on an assembly line, even if you and many of these folks don't have access to resilience training and mindfulness, even if you could practice those things in order to decrease the symptoms of stress, you're still being exposed to oftentimes long work hours, a lot of strain on your time, available to take breaks, for example.
Sure.
Some folks don't get to take breaks. So
yeah, the lack of control piece is really key there.
It is. And I think it plays a bigger role than sort of natural variation in human abilities to cope, because some jobs will take their toll, potentially, no matter how resilient you are or how much mindfulness you practice.
And does work stress sort of cluster in various professions? I mean, we've been talking about bus driving. So is it the case? I mean, it's, you probably don't have enough samples of wealthy bus drivers versus bus drivers who are working for the paycheck or wealthy assembly line, right? So,
Yeah.
So it likely this is me guessing. You guys know it clusters. There's certainly clusters around level of income, right? But are there also professions that so where work stress is hard to avoid?
Some occupations, okay, are worse than others. And this is not to say that there's any occupation which is ideal and there's no stressors, unless I think you're self-employed and you're wealthy and you do whatever you want. That may be
wealthy.
An occupation. Yeah. But threat avoid vigilance refers to those jobs and occupations where there is a perception, okay, on the part of the worker, okay, that there are threats, okay, and that they must be vigilant to avoid catastrophe and consequences. And bus drivers, which we started talking about, is a good example of a profession with a very high level of threat avoidance vigilance, because while you're driving the bus, the lives of all of these people in the bus are at you. You're responsible for them. I mean, so you have the combination of worrying about the people who are in the bus with you. You can't hit the brake, for example, when you're driving a bus the way the circumstances might demand, because there are people who are standing or sitting who will be flying around the bus and will be injured. And second, of course, there are all the people in the street,
Traffic.
The pedestrians, the bike riders, the other stupid competitive drivers of vehicles who are going to be cutting off your bus because, the bus doesn't really matter. And
plus, who wants to get stuck behind the bus and yada, yada, yada. Right?
Exactly. But in all seriousness, the bus driver, has to literally be aware of an entire environment of risks, which are changing every single moment that they're driving. Okay. That's the vigilance part of this. It's not like, you have a risky thing and then it's predictable. So you don't have to pay, it's not even like flying an airplane. Okay. Heart attacks in airplane pilots occur on takeoff and landing. Okay. Not during the multiple hours in which you're flying the plane from one destination to the other. Landing and taking off are highly risky activities. They very high levels of threat, and that's why we have 2 and 3 pilots on airplanes. Bus drivers, you would think, would have more than one bus driver, because they have catastrophic health consequences all the time when they're driving a bus. But it's too expensive to put 2 bus drivers into a bus. But essentially, the bus driving experience is a continuous threat avoidance vigilance situation with elevated blood pressure, and all of these spillover effects to the rest of their life.
So there are these health consequences, which you could talk about, but it also strikes me that health consequences have all sorts of effects on productivity, right? I mean, we know that sociologically over the years, right? I mean, it's like people get sick and so they don't come into work, and you have you have to pay somebody else overtime, or you got to fire that person and you have to retrain somebody, and that's expensive, and blah, 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 blah. I'm anticipating the answer to this question, but the way I want to ask it is, so there must be people banging down your doors, ringing your phone off the hook, asking for help, organizing help in how can I organize the work environment such that, it's a money saver. Talk some about the work. Or maybe it's the wrong question, but the Healthy Work campaign is both a research project, but it's also, I imagine that there's a service that one could provide for both for individuals and for organizations.
An educational program, David. A program intended to educate workers about what
workers and organizations, no? or no?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what is invisible to even the people who are working in these jobs? I mean, it's an incredible problem to educate our society to what work is doing to people in our modern society when the workers themselves, okay, who are experiencing these stressors are unaware of the fact that they are being damaged by this, okay? Um, there's a reason why they call high blood pressure the silent killer.
Sure.
People work for years on a job. Their blood pressures, we have epidemiologic studies. We see that the overall population blood pressure goes up roughly 1 millimeter per year that you work in the workplace. You enter the workplace at 120 over 80 at the age of 20, and you leave the workplace at 60 at roughly 140 over 90. So that's been explained by medical science. Oh, this is aging. The problem with that conclusion is it's not true. There are many groups within American society whose blood pressures don't go up inevitably with age, whose blood pressures are pretty much the same at the age of 60 or 80 as they were when they were 20 or 30. And non industrial cultures all over the world don't show increases of blood pressure with age. Agricultural workers, swing slash burn ergonomic workers, they are all groups of people whose blood pressures basically stay pretty much steady their whole lives. As those lives become more and more incorporated into the modern capitalist economic system, they start to show increases of blood pressure. So there are no more or very few hunter-gatherers left in the world, and there are very few agricultural communities that are untouched by capitalism. And as those groups are merged into the larger economic system of worldwide capitalism, they all show increases in their blood pressure.
If there is evidence that that's true, right, then I mean, what is the end game for the Healthy Work campaign or the Center for Social Epidemiology? Is it?
Well, I would say, we have our goals, and ultimately we are looking at a system that tends to exploit people and create more stress than the body can cope with, and that evolves into these chronic disease patterns. So it also creates poor mental health. So the idea is that, as we see these epidemics, mental health problems, depression, more cardiovascular disease, more hypertension around the world now, we have to consider, what are some ways of preventing that increase in hypertension and cardiovascular disease? How do we try to prevent ill health? One of the ways we believe is through adjusting and considering stress in the workplace. We do know that there are other factors that contribute. We know that poverty, we know that crime and living in unsafe neighborhoods where it's difficult to get proper nutrition and exercise and so forth contribute to these outcomes, these health outcomes. But we also know that there are elements in the work environment that we've just talked about that cause stress, which causes these physiological changes in the body over time. So the Healthy Work campaign is trying to educate people this is a reality. And like you were saying before, if we just ignore it, these processes are going to continue, and they're going to continue to make people unhealthy, oftentimes unhealthy at retirement, because that's when these problems show up. That's another story. But what we're trying to do is say, hey, this is an area we spend the majority of our waking hours in at work, and this might be a site at which we can start to try to improve working conditions across the board in these stressful workplaces, as well as other workplaces where there isn't threat avoidant vigilance. There's still stressful elements of work that can be changed. And so part of the Healthy Work campaign's goal is to offer ways of understanding what is it, how much stress do we actually have in our organization? What is the stress? And then we work with them to say, look, let's set some priorities, because you can't change everything about work. We're not going to eliminate capitalism as a form of, as a dominant form in our economy.
Sure.
But what we can do is work closely with working people, with their organizations, to try to make changes in the organization of work to try to reduce stress and therefore, improve health outcomes in the long run.
And
is productivity, as you said.
Sorry, go ahead, Peter. You were about to say something.
No, I think we have to take this a little bit further, okay? And in this regard, the people who are benefiting from capitalism, okay, they're not acting out of malice, okay, against working people. They have a business model, a economic system which generates wealth, which they are very proud of and which they think is beneficial. The difficulty is that our explanations of why people get sick, okay, have a blinder over the explanations.
Over that, yeah.
Our medical profession believes, okay, follows the individualist model of modern society. People are responsible for their own welfare. They benefit from working hard, from making good use of what resources they have, and they oftentimes get sick because they don't take proper care of themselves. They get high blood pressure because they're overweight, they eat too much, they smoke cigarettes, they fail to exercise, and these are the risk factors that individuals expose themselves to, and lo and behold, they get sick from these things, and they do not see that working conditions, okay, do two different things. One is that they arouse people and elevate their people's blood pressures. They stress people, these jobs, which means that they compensate for the stress by doing things like not eating properly.
Sure.
Or
Smoking
they work
cigarettes.
such long hours that they can't exercise properly or do things that would promote their own health and well-being. So we have a conceptual model in American society that places the responsibility on individuals, not on the social processes which guide our society.
There's an inclination to blame the individual. Well, I mean, I asked that question before. Well, what, temperament, right? So that's an individual, right? I'm pointing at those individuals. Other people are not affected that way, so whatever. So get a different job, right? Assuming you can. But are you directing the education towards the larger system, or are you simply trying to give people, simply is wrong, I don't mean to dismiss that like that, but to give people